Lindive told her family she had chosen Cato, everything in her life changed. Her family lived in Merna, a town filled with wealth and pride, and they believed she deserved a man with money, status, and power. But Cato had none of that. He had no big house, no cars, no business empire. Only his dreams and a heart that loved her deeply. Instead of seeing his kindness, her family saw him as a disgrace. They accused her of throwing away her future, of dragging their name into the mud. The words cut through her like sharp knives. Her own mother turned her face away. Her siblings whispered behind her back, and her uncles shouted that she was a disappointment. That evening, they pushed her out of the mansion she had always called home. She walked away in tears, her bags in her hands, her heart heavy but her spirit unwilling to give up on love. As the golden lights of the mansion faded behind her, she realized she was losing everything she had ever known: comfort, luxury, acceptance. But in the middle of her pain, one truth stayed strong in her chest. Cato may not have wealth, but with him she had love. And for her, the day Lindive told her family she had chosen Cato, everything in her life changed. Her family lived in Merna, a town filled with wealth and pride, and they believed she deserved a man with money, status, and power. But Cato had none of that. He had no big house, no cars, no business empire. Only his dreams and a heart that loved her deeply. Instead of seeing his kindness, her family saw him as a disgrace. They accused her of throwing away her future, of dragging their name into the mud. The words cut through her like sharp knives. Her own mother turned her face away. Her siblings whispered behind her back, and her uncles shouted that she was a disappointment. That evening, they pushed her out of the mansion she had always called home. She walked away in tears, her bags in her hands, her heart heavy but her spirit unwilling to give up on love. As the golden lights of the mansion faded behind her, she realized she was losing everything she had ever known: comfort, luxury, acceptance. But in the middle of her pain, one truth stayed strong in her chest. Cato may not have wealth, but with him she had love. And for her that was enough. Life with Cato was nothing close to the life Lindive once knew, but she never let regret enter her heart. Their little room on the outskirts of Zawara City was so small that when Cato stretched his arms, he almost touched both walls. The roof leaked when it rained, and the cold breeze slipped through the cracked window at night. Some evenings they went to bed with empty stomachs, listening to the sounds of the city outside while holding each other tightly for comfort. Yet, in that tiny space, there was something her parents' mansion never gave her: peace. Cato worked long hours as a laborer, sometimes carrying heavy loads at the market just to earn a few coins. He would come home tired, his shirt soaked in sweat, but his smile always returned the moment he saw Lindive waiting at the door. She would prepare whatever little food they had, sometimes just porridge or boiled cassava, and they would sit on the floor eating together like it was a feast. They laughed, they dreamed, and they encouraged each other. Whenever Lindive felt weak, Cato would remind her, "We may not have much today, but our love will build something tomorrow." There were nights when the sound of her relatives' cruel words echoed in her mind, but then she would look at Cato and remember why she chose him. His love was gentle, his faith in their future unshakable. Even when life tested them, he held her hand as if to say, "We are in this together." And slowly, Lindive learned that true wealth wasn't about big houses or fine clothes. It was about the laughter they shared in the dark, the way they leaned on each other, and the hope that one day their story would change. In poverty, they discovered a treasure that money could never buy. Every rumor that reached Lindive felt like another wound in her heart. It seemed her family never missed a chance to remind the world of her mistake. They would tell neighbors, "She threw away her future for a beggar," or, "She chose love over money, now look at her suffering." Their cruel words spread quickly through Merna and beyond, carried by gossiping tongues. People who once respected her began to look at her with pity, some even with hidden laughter in their eyes. It was as if her name had become a story to mock, a warning of what happens when a woman chooses love over wealth. Lindive tried to ignore it, but late at night, when she lay in their small room with her baby dreams and empty stomach, the words replayed in her head. She remembered the proud life she once lived, the clothes, the comfort, the honor of being called the daughter of a great family. Now those same people pointed fingers and whispered behind her back, calling her foolish, calling Cato useless. Every insult they threw at him hurt her even more, because she knew how hard he worked, how much he gave, even when the world saw nothing in him. Sometimes neighbors who believed the rumors would greet her with fake smiles, saying, "How are you managing? Life must be very tough with him." Others would look at her childless state in those early years and add more poison, whispering, "Not only did she marry a poor man, but she cannot even give him a child." Each comment was like salt on an open wound. But deep inside, Lindy refused to let their words break her completely. She would wipe her tears, hold Cato's hand, and remind herself that destiny is not written by family, neighbors, or rumors. Destiny belongs to God. And while everyone else mocked her struggles, she carried a quiet belief in her heart that one day, the same voices that shamed her would have no choice but to speak of her strength. When the time came for Tumulo's dedication, Lindy's heart beat with both excitement and fear. This was not just another Sunday service. It was a day to present her child before God, to say, "Lord, this is the gift you gave us, and we return him to you." But deep inside, she wanted more than just a blessing. She wanted her son to be honored with dignity, no matter how poor his parents were. That thought gave her courage to do something she never imagined she would. She sent invitations to her family. It was not easy. Her hands trembled as she wrote the messages. She stared at the words for a long time before pressing send. Memories of the last words they had spoken to her, "You are a shame you ruined your destiny," echoed in her head. She wondered if they would laugh at the invitation or worse, ignore it completely. Still, she believed Tumulo deserved every chance to be surrounded by family, even those who had turned their backs on her. Cato tried to comfort her, saying, "Even if no one comes, God will be there. And that is enough." His words touched her, but she couldn't silence the small hope that maybe, just maybe, her family would show up and see that her life was not a failure. She prayed over the invitations, asking God to touch their hearts. In the days leading to the dedication, Lindy noticed the whispers around her. Neighbors were curious. Some smirked. Will her rich family even bother attending? Others pitied her, shaking their heads. But Lindy held her ground. This day was not about proving anything to anyone. It was about giving Tumulo the honor he deserved. The night before the ceremony, as she laid her baby to sleep, she whispered into the silence, "Tomorrow, my son, the world will know you are not just the child of a poor man. You are a child chosen by God." Even if only the two of them walked into that church, she was ready to stand tall with Cato by her side, carrying their miracle with pride. The day of Tumulo's dedication arrived, and with it came a mix of nerves and determination for Lindy. She dressed in a simple, elegant gown, her hair neatly braided, and held her baby close, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against her chest. She and Cato arrived early, their hearts pounding, unsure of who would show up. It wasn't long before the familiar sound of expensive cars pulling into the church courtyard announced the arrival of her family. One by one they stepped out, perfectly groomed, wearing matching outfits that spoke of wealth and pride. Their eyes swept the room with the air of entitlement, until they landed on Lindy. For a brief moment silence fell, followed by subtle, sharp whispers. "Why is she here?" one aunt muttered under her breath. "The poor man's wife should sit at the back," another whispered. Lindy felt her chest tighten, but she refused to shrink or turn away. Cato squeezed her hand gently, giving her a small reassuring smile. They walked together down the aisle, heads held high, ignoring the sideways glances and whispered judgments. Some of the churchgoers were visibly curious, glancing from the lavishly dressed relatives to the modest couple making their way to the front. Lindy felt the sting of shame trying to creep back in, but she focused on the small bundle in her arms, Tumulo. He was her reason, her courage, her hope. The pews at the front had been reserved for the family, and now she and Cato took their place among them. Her relatives' faces were tight with disapproval. Some tried to hide their astonishment that she had dared to sit there as if she belonged. The contrast between the polished luxury of her family and the simplicity of her gown was stark, yet Lindy stood firm, her posture straight, her chin lifted. She could feel the weight of judgment in the air, but she also felt a quiet power rising within her, a strength born from years of pain, endurance, and love. This was her moment, and no amount of disdain. Cato held Lindy's hand tightly as they walked down the church aisle, his grip warm and steady, a silent promise that she was not facing this alone. Every step felt heavy, as if the weight of years of ridicule and rejection pressed down on her shoulders. The whispers from her family and the curious glances from the congregation brushed against her like cold winds, trying to shake her confidence. Yet, with Cato beside her, she felt a quiet courage rising within her, a strength she hadn't known she possessed. They moved slowly but steadily, heads held high, refusing to let shame dictate their posture. Lindiau's eyes flicked to her baby Tumalo swaddled in her arms, his tiny face serene and innocent. The thought of protecting him, of showing him that love and dignity are stronger than wealth and judgment, gave her the courage to keep walking. Every step was a defiance against the cruel words of her relatives, every breath a declaration that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. Cato whispered softly in her ear, "We are here together. Nothing can touch us if we stand as one." His words were a balm to her trembling heart. The church seemed to stretch endlessly, the front pews still far ahead, but each step brought them closer not just to the altar, but to a turning point in their lives. Lindiau felt the tension in her chest, the pounding of her heart, but beneath it all, there was pride. Pride in choosing love, pride in enduring hardship, pride in standing unbroken in the face of humiliation. As they reached the front pews, Lindiau took a deep breath, letting her shoulders relax just a little. She glanced at Cato and their eyes met, exchanging a silent understanding. They had survived the judgment, the whispers, the stares. Together they had carried not just their own pain, but their hope, their love and their child through the storm. In that moment Lindiau realized that true strength was quiet, steady and unshakable, and she had it within her, hidden but. The ceremony began, and a hush fell over the church as the pastor carefully lifted little Tumalo into his arms. His tiny fingers curled around the pastor's hand, and his wide eyes blinked at the bright lights above, innocent and unknowing of the weight of the day. Lindiau clutched Cato's hand, feeling both excitement and fear swirl in her chest. The room was filled with the soft rustle of fabric, the faint scent of flowers, and the quiet anticipation of everyone present. For a moment the past seemed to pause, the whispered insults, the cruel words, the nights of hunger and tears. They all felt far away, replaced by this sacred, tender moment. The pastor began to speak, his voice calm and strong, lifting Tumalo as he prayed. "Lord, bless this child, protect him and guide his steps all the days of his life," he said. Each word sank deep into Lindiau's heart, and she closed her eyes, pressing her baby closer. Her lips moved silently, whispering a prayer only she could hear. "Lord, make this day a testimony they will never forget. Let them see your hand in our lives. Let my child grow in dignity, strength, and favor." A single tear slid down her cheek as hope and gratitude swelled inside her. Around her, the church seemed to breathe with reverence. People watched quietly, sensing that this was more than a simple dedication. It was a moment of triumph born from struggle. Cato's other hand rested gently on her back, a steadying presence. He too was lost in prayer, silently asking for blessings on the son they had longed for, the son who had given them courage to survive every hardship together. Lindiau opened her eyes and looked at Tumalo's small face, soft and peaceful, and felt a warmth she had never known before. In that moment all her fears seemed distant shadows. This ceremony was more than tradition. It was proof that love and faith could conquer shame, poverty, and rejection. And as the pastor continued, the words of blessing felt like sunlight breaking through. Just as the pastor finished the final prayer and the dedication seemed to come to a close, a hush fell over the church once more. From the middle of the crowd a tall man stood. He wore an elegant agbada that shimmered softly under the church lights, each fold and stitch speaking of wealth and careful taste. His face was unfamiliar to most of the congregation, but the moment he rose, a strange energy filled the room. People instinctively turned to look, sensing that this was no ordinary visitor. His posture was calm but commanding, and even the whispers that had filled the air moments before seemed to pause in respect. He stepped forward and asked for the microphone, his voice deep, smooth, and steady as it carried through the quiet hall. Everyone leaned slightly forward, curiosity mingling with awe. Lindiau felt her heart skip a beat, unsure of what to expect. The stranger's eyes were warm yet intense, scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. He paused for a moment, letting his gaze settle on the small family at the front. Lindiau felt a shiver of anticipation. There was something about him that made her feel both nervous and hopeful at the same time. The congregation fell completely silent, hanging on his every movement. Some of Lindiau's relatives shifted uncomfortably, Sensing that this man was not just another guest, they could feel the weight of his presence, as though he carried authority that no one dared to challenge. Cato instinctively moved a step closer to Lindiwe, his hand finding hers, squeezing gently. She returned the squeeze, silently asking for courage. Then the man lifted the microphone, cleared his throat and spoke. His words were deliberate, but even before he spoke, Lindiwe could sense that whatever he was about to say would change the atmosphere entirely. The room leaned in breathless, and in that moment she realized, this stranger was not here by chance. Something extraordinary was about to happen, something that might. The man adjusted the microphone and looked steadily at Lindiwe and Cato. His deep voice filled the church, steady and powerful, cutting through every whisper and murmur. "I was once like Cato," he began, his eyes reflecting a memory of struggle. "I was poor, rejected, looked down upon. People laughed at me, just as many have laughed at you." His gaze softened as it settled on the little baby cradled in Lindiwe's arms. "But today," he continued, "I stand here as one of the wealthiest men in Merna, and I know that what makes a person great is not money, but courage, heart, and faith." Every word felt like a lifeline thrown into Lindiwe's chest. The church was silent, as if even the air was holding its breath. Some of her relatives' faces had gone pale, the pride and mockery that had once burned in their eyes now replaced with unease and curiosity. The man smiled gently, leaning slightly toward Tumalo. "I see courage in this couple," he said, his voice tender but firm. "I see love that refuses to be broken by shame, judgment, or hardship. I see parents who chose each other and held on to hope when the world told them to give up." Lindiwe felt tears prick her eyes. Cato's grip on her hand tightened as the man's words sank in. He was not just speaking. They were witnessing someone acknowledge their pain, their perseverance, and their worth in front of everyone. "I will honor this courage," the man said, lifting his hand slightly, "because the world must see that true value is in the heart, not the wallet, and the love you have for each other. For this child is more powerful than any fortune." Whispers ran through the church, this time filled with awe and disbelief rather than judgment. Lindiwe's relatives shifted nervously, unsure how to respond. The man's presence, his words, and his recognition of their quiet struggle made the air crackle with electricity. Lindiwe clutched Tumalo tighter, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and hope surge through her. In that moment, the church was already quiet from the billionaire's words. But then he leaned closer to the microphone, and what he said next made the room almost explode. "I will sponsor this young boy's education all the way through university," he declared, his voice calm but unwavering. "And I will gift this family a new home, right here in the heart of Merna." For a moment no one moved. Then came the gasps, sharp, loud, and full of disbelief. Heads turned from Lindiwe and Cato to the stranger, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. Some people whispered to each other, barely daring to believe what they had just heard. The grandeur of the announcement hung in the air, heavier than the richest perfume or the loudest laugh. Lindiwe felt her heart pound in her chest, tears springing to her eyes. She looked down at Tumalo, tiny and innocent in her arms, and imagined him growing up with opportunities she had only dreamed of. Her family, the same people who had once called her foolish and mocked her for marrying a poor man, bowed their heads in shame. Pride, arrogance, and judgment, all the walls they had built to feel superior, crumbled in that moment. They could hardly meet her eyes, unable to deny the truth. She had been right to follow her heart, and the universe had chosen to honor her courage in a way they could never have predicted. Cato's hand squeezed hers tightly, a quiet affirmation of all they had endured together. Lindiwe's lips trembled as she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, her tears falling freely now. Around them the church seemed alive with awe. People stared, some in disbelief, some with admiration, and others quietly reflecting on the harshness of their own judgments. In that instant the room shifted. The focus was no longer on the wealth or status of her family or the opinions of others. It was on love, faith, and perseverance. Lindiwe realized that this gift wasn't just for Tumalo or for them as a family. It was a powerful message to everyone who had doubt. The moment the billionaire finished speaking, a strange shift rippled through the church. Lindiwe's relatives, who had spent years mocking her, whispering cruel words, and turning their noses up at her life, suddenly seemed unsure how to act. One by one they approached her, their steps hesitant, faces forced into smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Congratulations, Lindiwe," her aunt said, her voice tight, betraying a mix of pride and embarrassment. Her cousins murmured apologies, awkwardly brushing their hands over their clothes, as if to hide the guilt that had been long simmering inside them. For years Lindiwe had imagined the words she would say if she ever faced them again. Words sharp, full of anger, ready to strike back at their cruelty. But now, looking at them, she realized she didn't need to speak at all. The silence she held was louder than any insult she could throw or any argument she could make. Destiny itself had spoken, and it had done so loudly and clearly. Their mockery, their arrogance, their attempts to belittle her, they had crumbled under the weight of truth. Cato rested a hand on her back, offering silent support, and she felt a wave of calm sweep over her. She looked down at Tumalo, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and felt a deep, almost dizzying sense of triumph. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice in the most natural, undeniable way. Through love, perseverance, and faith, the people who had once made her feel small were now forced to recognize her strength, and for the first time she felt fully free from the weight of their judgment. Some of the neighbors whispered to each other, astonished at the reversal of fortune, while others nodded in admiration. Lindiwe kept her head high, her lips curving into a gentle smile. She didn't need their praise, their acceptance, or their approval. She had something far greater: peace, dignity, and the undeniable proof that choosing love over wealth had led her to a life richer than she aged. Lindiwe held Tumalo close to her chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his tiny body. Tears rolled down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. But they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and triumph. For years she had carried so much pain. The harsh words of her family, the nights of hunger, the constant feeling of being judged and rejected. And now, in this quiet, powerful moment, all that suffering seemed to melt away. Tumalo, her little boy, her miracle, was more than just a child. He was the proof that love, faith, and patience could rewrite a life. She kissed the top of his head, inhaling the soft scent of baby skin, and whispered a prayer of thanks. "Thank you, Lord, for him," she murmured. "Thank you for using him to show me, and even those who doubted me, that you are faithful." Every glance at his innocent eyes reminded her that he was the key to her story turning around. The hardships that had once weighed so heavily on her now felt like necessary steps on the path to this very moment. Tumalo was a living testament that even in the darkest times, God's plan could shine through. Cato stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, his eyes glistening with pride. He leaned down and kissed her temple, whispering, "We did it. Look at him. Look at what we built together." Lindiwe smiled through her tears, realizing that their shared struggles had not broken them. They had strengthened them. Their love had endured, and it had created something beautiful, something eternal in the form of their son. As she looked around the church, seeing the astonishment on her relatives' faces, the quiet respect in the congregation, she understood the true meaning of triumph. It was not about wealth, revenge, or public approval. It was about surviving, loving, and holding on to faith when the world tried to push you down. Tumalo was more than a blessing. He was victory, hope, and proof that God's timing is perfect. And in that moment Lindiwe knew T. After the dedication, Lindiwe's relatives could no longer ignore the truth that had been standing right in front of them. For years they had judged her for marrying a poor man, for living without luxury, and for enduring hardships that they thought would break her spirit. But now, seeing her standing tall with Tumalo in her arms, glowing with pride and love, they realized that everything they had believed about wealth and status was shallow and empty. Love, courage, and perseverance, things money could never buy, were what truly mattered. They had mocked her struggles, thinking that poverty would define her life, that rejection from her own family would crush her completely. Yet here she was, unbroken and radiant, her life a living example of strength and faith. Tumalo, the little boy they had probably assumed would carry shame, now represented hope, honor, and a future filled with opportunity. The relatives who once whispered cruel words were now forced to look at her differently. Their eyes, which had often been filled with judgment, now reflected astonishment and a quiet shame. They realized that rejection, instead of ending her, had only made her stronger. Some of them tried to smile, offering belated congratulations, but Lindiwe could see the difference. It was not pride, but respect tempered with humility. They would never look at her the same way again because they had witnessed something far greater than wealth, a woman who had chosen love over comfort, who had endured pain without bitterness, and who had allowed faith to guide her through darkness into triumph. In those silent, powerful moments, Lindiau's family learned a lesson they would never forget. Life's true measure is not in gold, clothes, or cars, but in the heart, the courage to stand firm, and the love that refuses to waver. And as they watched her hold Tumalo, glowing with the quiet strength that only a mother's love can give, they understood that they had been wrong to doubt her. Rejection had. The story of Lindiau, once called the poor man's wife, spread like wildfire across Merna and beyond. People talked about the woman who had walked into church quietly, humble and unsure, carrying only her love for Cato and the hope she had never let die. They whispered about how the same people who had mocked her were now forced to watch her be honored in front of everyone, how her tiny room on the outskirts had given birth to a life filled with courage and faith. Her story touched hearts because it was real. It showed that pain, rejection, and struggle were not the end, but could be the soil where greatness grows. Everywhere she went after that day, strangers stopped her to shake her hand, to congratulate her, or simply to tell her how inspired they were. Mothers whispered to their daughters, teaching them that love and patience could carry a person further than wealth ever could. Young couples looked at Cato and Lindiau and saw proof that choosing heart over status could lead to triumph. Even her relatives, once proud and dismissive, spoke of her with respect, realizing too late that they had judged a life they didn't understand. Lindiau held Tumalo close and smiled, knowing that the greatest victory wasn't the house, the sponsorship, or the recognition. It was the journey itself. Every tear, every struggle, every whispered insult had led to this moment of undeniable glory. She had turned rejection into triumph, humility into honor, and love into a legacy. And in the hearts of everyone who heard her story, Lindiau became more than a woman who overcame. She became a living testimony that when life closes doors, destiny is often opening a window to something far greater.